Yeah. Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to call this regular meeting, echoey, the regular meeting of the Board of Education to order and ask us all to join in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. All right. To the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening. So just make note that we're joined by Meg Scotta on Zoom and John Dillon on Zoom as well. Tonight on our agenda, before we approve the agenda, I would just like to ask us to make one small amendment. We're going to add under new business, item A, and it's a stipulated agreement that would be discussed under executive session. So with that amendment, is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Thank you, Kim.
I'll second that.
And seconded by Dave. Thank you both. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. And actually, can we pause for a second? I want to make sure that we can hear Meg and that Meg can hear us.
Hi, good evening.
Meg.
I'm here. I'm here.
Great, thank you. Just checking that you're with us. Perfect.
Yes, I am. Yep,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Thank you.
So the next item is approval of our consent agenda, which includes the approval of the regular meeting minutes from June 3rd, 2025, approval of Grin and Barrett donation to Gildersleeve in the amount of $173.50, approval of a Liberty Bank Golf League donation to PHS Athletics in the amount of $900, approval of interstate studio donation to Gildersleeve Elementary School in the amount of $52.60, and approval of an out-of-state field trip for the Portland High School Band and Chorus to Virginia Beach next April 2026. So with all of those are currently under the consent agenda, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Thank you, Stacy. Is there a second? Seconded by Sarah. Is there any discussion on any of those items? Nope. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Audience of citizens. We don't have any audience of citizens in person. Do we have anyone online who wishes to address the board? Meg and John. All right. And we're gonna keep moving. We do not have a Portland Public Schools spotlight this evening, and we do not have any student representatives with us this evening. So we'll move to item 8, communications and updates. Dr. Britton.
All right, keep rolling tonight.
We are on a roll.
Got a cute, put a few things in your drive for you. I just want to quickly review them. First, as you know, the legislative session ended. I included it in there. What we will be receiving for our equalized cost sharing grant, ECS grant. You'll notice that, as you know, in this year's budget, we got the extra 204,000 at the where is it, 4979. Next year we can anticipate the same. So it's nice to get this information way ahead of time.
Yeah.
Obviously, we won't be using this until we begin planning the budget, but it's there. So I thought you'd be interested in that, and there it is. So we already have a jump start on next year's budget development season.
Great. And that 204,000 was what we had budgeted for. It hasn't changed since our budget was crafted.
Correct.
That's good news.
Okay, so no questions about that. I did receive several resignations. So Alexandra Alessandri, she was our ABA lab teacher at Valley View this year. She is I believe she's heading back to Long Island. Wish her all the best. Thank her for her service this year. Also have Brenda Giebord, who you may know was one of our level 1 technicians this year. She's moving out to Cincinnati with her family. Gonna miss Brenda. She and her husband and her children were wonderful additions to the community, but we wish Brenda all the best of luck. I've already filled Alexandra's position and have already interviewed and will be, I believe, tomorrow filling that position for Brenda. So we got a lot of summer.
That's good news.
wish them both well. And then we have Kayla Comesso and Megan Hickey, paraprofessionals who are going on to do different things. As a reminder, at our next personnel committee, I have lots of exit interview results to share with people. I've done exit interviews with only one person I haven't done it, which is Brenda, but other folks here. Pretty good insights into why people are leaving, mostly having to do with relocation, career advancement, other types of things. But we'll be sharing that feedback with the personnel committee. So wish everybody well in their future endeavors. Last thing I did include in there was our triennial assessment. So as you know, once every 3 years, we have to evaluate ourselves, and Sodexo helps us with this, and we use something called the WellSat assessment. It's a lengthier document, but we use a rubric to score ourselves, and then use the feedback to design a plan for ongoing improvement in having to do with nutrition and wellness and physical activity and policy and outreach and physical fitness and a whole bunch of things, whether we give, candy as prizes and any number of different things. So it's a lengthy report. Hope you take a look at it. I think the feedback in it was terrific, and I pretty much agree with everything there. And we did put together here a pretty nice plan for how we're going to address those areas that we need to address. Nothing major deficiencies. There's just a few things that we can do better, right? As a reminder, our new director of teaching and learning, in that job description, Chuck will be our school climate specialist district-wide and our new wellness coordinator district-wide. So I shared this report with Chuck. Chuck's going to take a look at it. This will be part of our leadership team planning this summer for how we continue to promote wellness in the district. Thought you wanted to take a look at that. Otherwise, happy to review it at a future meeting, but I think the best time to review this would be in the context of the Taco School and District School Improvement Plans, all of which will incorporate the adjustments we make, both the new climate legislation and reflect on all of our data this year. So this piece of information, along with student test scores and attendance rates and discipline data and all the different types of data that we collect, we use it at the end of the year to reflect and then design goals for the coming year. So take a look at this, and then we'll be referencing this and talking more about this in the context of what we're doing for next year.
Charles, it looked like, because when I was scanning through these, it's kind of scores you on how you've put things into practice, and it also scores you on whether things are present in your policies. As Chuck is looking through this, I know he's now on our policy committee, which is great. Will he be trying to identify in the areas specific to policy where we're a little bit, where we have room for improvement? Will he be bringing recommendations forward for, whether it's new policies or making edits, tweaking language in current policy? Is he going to take the lead on that piece also?
He sure will. Most of it's in the district wellness policy. We adopted that last year. It's a long time in development, but there are some areas of the wellness policy that we probably do need to change some of the language in it.
Already?
Yeah, there's
Just implemented, maybe just, okay.
There's a couple of, again, things like, trying to work with more locally grown things, or, I'll be honest, a lot of these things, they go through Sodexo. I'm not doing a lot of buying apples and bringing them into the schools, but there are some, how do I say, asks that districts look for locally grown opportunities or develop more relationships with, area farms.
All of that's wonderful. If that was, my question is, if that was reflected in our policy, is that something that Sodexo has the capacity to then do? Because my understanding from past conversations was always that our hands were a little bit tied by what Sodexo was able to, how Sodexo operates and what they were able to do for us.
Yeah, I just pulled that out as an example. There might be opportunities to include language that, to the maximum extent possible, or when appropriate, or within available means. I think that's what you'll see as we start to dig into practice and policy. But
I think there was a policy for farm to table at some point that was not mandatory. It was recommended, and we didn't do anything about it, and we could look at that again. We could pull that back up.
Yeah, we'll like I said, I gave the report to Chuck. He'll take a look at it, and then, whether it goes through policy or, building level practice, we'll make sure
Okay.
We work on these things, and then hopefully we'll see the results of those 3 years later when we do the next round of the assessment.
But we should expect to see some of this reflected in the taco plans as they're developed by our administrative team.
Absolutely. Yep.
Did folks have other questions about this report? No? Okay.
And then the last thing I have for you all is have a great summer. It's been awesome. Great school year. Today was the last day. I tell you, there's nothing better than going to Valley View on the last day of school. There's a certain energy. The last week of school, I'm so impressed with graduation and moving up ceremonies and picnics, and kids have a great experience here. It really was a good year. I'm very much in need of a little rest. I would say. But it's been a great.
Sure, you're not alone in that.
It's been an exciting year. Last piece of business I have for you then. And Laurel, I'm not going to talk about last night's meeting. I think that we'll save that for the strategic capital.
Sure.
This committee, but I
Yep.
know the board would love an update. on
I'll be
the
happy
4-hour
to give an update on the 4-hour meeting last night.
But I do want to get your feedback on the date for our board retreat. And thank you for filling out the doodle poll.
I did not.
Oh, okay. Well, that's all right.
The
So-
one, I gotta look at my work calendar, so that's what I really need to see when I can take a chunk of time.
Yeah, so Dave got it. He's available at any of these days. Laurel is, Sarah is available. Laurel, you're not available one. Unfortunately, Kim, you're not available any. You must be doing the SY. Sorry.
If we were to, do you do ESY all 5 days a week or
It's 5
it
days
is 5 days a
or
week?
Done at 11:30 noonish.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not like even looking at a Friday morning would make it easier for you. I mean, we could potentially look at an afternoon.
We do have sub coverage availability that I could try to see if I could get a colleague to cover me to do one morning.
Do you want to do that and
If
let
there's
us know?
one that you can say, it looks like it works. for
That's what I
most
was gonna
folks.
say. If you can give me an option when I get home, I will.
Yeah.
I might be able to pull on my work calendar here.
I tell you what, Trisha's here. Why don't you reach out to Stacy and Kim tomorrow, and I'll give you the doodle poll. You can pick if we can find one of the days that works for you guys, with the exception of one day for Meg and one day for Laurel.
I think it was the same day.
Yeah, I think it was the same. The only day that didn't work was July 17th. Looks like everybody else is available any of those days. So if we can get Stacy and Kim dialed in on one of these dates, we'll put it on the calendar. And that will be for our board retreat. Have us at 9 to noon, so we'll do a breakfast together. And then in terms of topics, I'd love what I'm sort of going to ask you for at that meeting, a couple of things. One, I'd love your input or guidance on things you'd like to see us incorporating in our school improvement plans or district improvement plans for next year. Of course, I have lots of meetings scheduled with the leadership team to develop those, reflect on the year, and get things ready for next year. And then I also think, and Laurel and I can talk about this by then, which is going to be the middle of July. I expect that you'll hear about the work last night, but I expect by that July date, I will have written the committee report for the strategic planning committee. I think if we talked about what your input in terms of where you'd like to see us heading as a district for goals, and those are two pretty meaty things that are going to frame a lot of conversation, I promise, next year.
Yeah.
So unless you have any other ideas for agenda topics, to me, development of goals for next year and the outcome of last night's recommendations from the strategic planning committee, which Laurel will share with you tonight when you get to the committee reports.
Charles, one of the things I'd like to at least talk about, because if we're talking about plans for improvement, is if you can share some of the data. I know it's raw at this point and we won't get it until probably end of the year, but the smarter balance assessments or any other assessments that would help us to understand any holes that we're trying to fill in curricular areas for student achievement, whether it's interventionist stuff or it's just our math scores were low or the reading is high and we're going to focus on something else. I think that it would be helpful for the board to see some of the data, maybe from some of the assessments this year to see where those gaps are.
Big
So-
picture data.
Yeah, but
Yeah, yeah.
Have that to, share with you,
Not at, not at the granular level
Right.
that we
yeah,
see in the fall in a report, but if there's some big picture takeaways from the data that you could share with the board at that point to inform us.
for sure.
yeah,
That would be helpful.
yeah. That would be helpful, very helpful, actually. Thank you.
Good. So a big picture snapshot of data, and then your ideas for, well, more of a discussion that can inform my thinking as I work with the leadership team, and then definitely we'll need to set aside some time for some very large dollar amounts and some big ideas for what we need to do in the area of facilities.
And if we can get that information, like the data that we would be sharing so that we can be, more productive in our recommendations. If we can have that ahead of the retreat, that would be helpful.
Any other, this is a little bit off the top of your head, but if there's any other requests or topics that folks want, to be considered for conversation at the retreat, you can either share it now, or if you have other ideas, feel free to send an email later.
I think the only other thing in following on what Meg said is at last summer's retreat, I think we also were looking at like climate survey data. So I don't
Right.
know if we have that compiled, but I think the purpose of looking at it was to inform our input for taco plans. So that would be.
I think that's another important part of the data. It's always good to hear what we do well, but it's also nice to see where there are the holes that we can fill.
Yeah, that's a good point, Sarah. I don't know I know the climate survey is out currently. I don't know when it
Yeah.
closes or how readily available any of that will be. But, and it doesn't need to be all of it or the raw data. If there's just big picture
Right.
takeaways that the board should be aware of, maybe that would be helpful.
We'll need is to pick a date, and Tricia will follow up with Stacy and Kim and see if we can find now.
That sounds great.
Yes, like the calendars.
All right.
That's all right.
That's all. Okay, fantastic. Then next up is our Director of Student Services. We have Sarah with us this evening.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Sarah. Happy last day of school.
Thank you. So no really big updates from me. You saw the report, kind of the usual, but I do want to highlight a couple of things which are extended school year, hiring for our third van that was purchased, and then also what I spoke about last time, our prevalence rate within special education. I think those are like three highlights. On the first page, our numbers are, very consistent with this time of year. The outplacement number I just noted here, it is flat at 20, but it does represent 2 students who have returned from outplacement back to district and 2 that have required outplacement services. So it's a 20, but please know they're shifting in that number and who those students are. As far as overall special education enrollment, if you see that number to the far left where it says total IEPs, 273, you can see in June of 2024, that number was 284. So that kind of reflects some work that the admin team has been doing. Obviously, it's, still quite high as far as our prevalence of students with IEPs, but we're working as a leadership team to really address both the disproportionality I've talked about and overall, over identification. So that's a number I'll keep highlighting because we're going to continue working on that piece. But I am pleased that, within a calendar year, we are just being judicious about eligibility criteria and that number, being disproportionately high for our population at this time. So those are the 2 highlights there. Any questions on just our general data of IEPs, outplacements, all that good stuff?
Just a
Yeah.
quick question on the 2 out and the 2 in.
Yep.
Sometimes some are getting higher reimbursements for whatever their situation is. Is there any change in our cost structure because of that?
So generally, to hit that excess cost number, there's not a huge variation within different. Some programs are more or less expensive. The things that end up being high ticket for that reimbursement are one-to-one paraprofessional needs and outplacement. So if a student in an outplacement setting also requires like a one-to-one paraeducator, a one-to-one nurse, that's an additional cost on top of tuition. So no, for these 4 students, there's not a high cost in or out, but things like that would affect the number.
Well, not only cost, but reimbursement. I know like there's some students that the government gives us more, or if they're from Hartford, or they're from homeless, or whatever the
Right, right.
situation.
So, yeah, so
reimbursement.
for example, open choice students, when they require outplacement services, that represents an open choice seat that is no longer open in Portland Public Schools, if that makes sense. So we're not paying full freight that is reimbursed through Hartford.
Yeah.
For these students, again, I can't speak specifically about, students and the services
No,
they
no, just-
receive, but
Just a general.
yeah, but no big shifts in the number here or there in the reimbursement. But, when that does happen, things that do change it are, as you mentioned, open choice, one-to-one power, one-to-one nurse, or special transport, like something
Yeah.
like a wheelchair van or a nurse on a van. Those things will make the cost of one student significantly higher than another. But generally tuition
Yeah.
and transportation across the board are pretty flat. There was some legislation, I'm sure you saw, that the state is looking at rate setting around some of
Mhm.
those providers. So there's some hope there that the price will be a bit more reasonable. But other than those factors, it's generally same amount. Yeah.
Mhm.
All right. Any other questions on that section?
Sarah,
Okay.
I had a question very quickly. When we are sending somebody out to outplacement, and this just comes from some part of the legislation that was passed about auditing programs, do we actually go into a PPT meeting when they do come back to our district or before they do, that we know where they are in terms of their achievement or
Yep.
their wellness at that point? And then have we encountered any issues with programs that we are not using anymore because they're not effective or they don't produce the effect or the outcome that we are hoping for?
Right. Yeah, those are excellent questions. So, in Portland, because we're so small, I serve as the outplacement case manager. So I actually write all the IEPs for our students that are outplaced. I determine where we're sending kids, when they're in that process of looking for the best fit of a placement. I typically visit them when they're in their outplacements, attend all their PPTs. So there is a large amount of district oversight. It's not like they just go and we don't know how they're doing. Typically, I'll go with families for the tours as well, just to serve as, another critical eye as they go through and look at the programs. I did also serve this year on an accreditation committee for one of the schools that we do work with, so that was exciting.
Okay.
I will say there's a lot of oversight. I think, there are programs that wax and wane with how effective they are. Just like us, they struggle with staffing, retention of staff, resources. And we're mindful that we don't, put forward a student to anywhere that we know, is a
That-
concern. But
that
in
we
terms of
haven't
the
seen,
ongoing, right, in terms of the ongoing oversight, they're a big piece of my job. So I'm aware of how they're doing, participate in all PPTs. I go and see them frequently. Parents call our office for, any of their needs. We're really mindful to make sure that they know and their families know they are Portland students. They might be attending school somewhere else, but they're still ours. And they
and I
connected to us. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that because, and I don't think that may not be a known fact. So, and I know we do the right thing by our kids because they do come back and they are successful and they are achieving. But to hear it from you and to know that we're on it and watching very carefully, I appreciate that. And that's a reassurance for anybody that has children in the special ed program. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, they're always our kids, regardless of where they're educated. And we take that really seriously.
Thank you. Thank you. I do too. Thanks.
Yeah,
Thank
no
you.
problem. Any other questions there? Nope. All right. Forging right ahead. Everyone's favorite topic, van driver hiring. So Bob Shea is wonderful and he believes that we will have our third van by July 1, which allows us to use it for some extended school year transportation. I don't know if he's personally lettering it himself like the previous van, but he said it will be ready to go. He has some hookup at the dealership, but we have van driver interviews this week. I will say, when we first did this, I think the pool was a lot more shallow. I've been really surprised by the number of qualified applicants we've had. We've had a large number. So I think we really will have a nice group of people. I think the one barrier might be people looking at full-time versus something, more part-time, but we are hoping even if folks aren't looking for, the role that we have, they'd be like a backup driver if they have, gaps in their schedule. But Olivia and I have interviews this whole week. There's a lot of strong folks that, drive for other transportation companies and are looking for something kind of smaller. So I am feeling good about that, but that is the only position as of now we are hiring for. Any questions on open positions? Nope, no applicants for van driver at the table. Okay. Extended school year. So, though a lot of our schools kind of go into sleepy mode over the summer, extended school year is still going for the month of July. So that is just for a refresher, essentially summer school, right? It's continuing services for our special education students. We're not running an enrichment program this year that was run in the past for all students. So at Gildersleeve and the high school, we will have special education students, about 100 at this point, receiving services through the summer. We'll have 13 teachers, 18 paras. We'll have OT, PT, speech, BCBA, clinicians, all those services. It is a half-day program. And we are also running through the summer mental health grant that we were awarded last year, some services for students in the community, be it if they're attending Parks and Rec camp or going to YMCA camp. We do have paras and BCBAs and clinicians, out in the community and supporting kids as they need it through that grant, which is nice. As far as extended school year, we, as I mentioned, are using those 3 minivans to great effect to kind of offset some of that transportation cost. Obviously, as we know, geography is a huge barrier. Kids are all going at different times on different schedules to different parts of the state, but Olivia has worked incredibly hard to, make that jigsaw puzzle work. So you will see our 3 vans heading all over the state. So wave to them if you see them. Any ESY or transportation questions? Nope. So last section, professional development. Over the summer, our staff take a well-deserved break for the most part, but we do have 2 things I want to highlight. We do have, through again, that summer mental health grant that we were awarded last year, our Bridge and Harbor programs, which are our therapeutic programs, K through 12, are going to do some, program development over the summer. It's hard during the school year to have time to breathe and kind of think big picture about how do we want to tweak aspects of our program? Where can we grow? Where can we change? So those 4 staff members have about 20 hours that they're going to do through that grant. So we're hoping to make some positive tweaks to those programs for the next school year. All right. Any questions?
No, thank you.
No problem.
Excellent. Any other questions here? No? Sarah, thank you so much.
Sure, no problem.
That's great. All right. So under new business, the addition of the stipulated agreement conversation, that's going to be discussed in the executive session. So we're going to circle back to that. Under old business, we had 1 item lingering. It's our Board of Education self-evaluation, and that will also be discussed under executive session. So we will come back to that. So we're going to move on to committee reports. Curriculum has not met. We need to set a date. But we're letting our new director of teaching and learning acclimate to his position first. And maybe we will work on that for later in the summer. Policy.
Well, we met tonight. I did not meet because I have a concussion, but I imagine we'll meet in a couple of weeks. I think there's another meeting on the books. And Laurel, can you address that because I wasn't there tonight?
Yeah, so tonight we had a good discussion about a cell phone draft policy. So that will be coming to the board for a first read next month. We also did circle back to the the policy on not developing a non-lapsing account, and had a good conversation about that. Made a tweak to the language, but there will be a second read of that scheduled for our next board meeting. And I will just say that the conversation we had, Stacy and Dr. Britton and I all did feel pretty strongly that we wanted to bring back the policy with the intention of keeping the use of that fund restricted to special education costs. And so we can talk more about that at our next meeting, but we'll be bringing that back for a second read. We made it through the last CABE policy update from May, and to feel confident we've addressed that, and we're kind of getting caught up for the next policy update that will come out over the summer. Is there
Great.
anything else that we talked about that I didn't cover, Stacy? I think that was everything. That was the highlights.
The transfer of funds, we're gonna keep talking about that.
We're-
gonna work on,
we're-
and we're anticipating a very meaty
Yeah.
CABE policy update this summer with all the changes we have in this legislative session.
Yeah.
So good progress. I think we're almost
Making progress.
caught up for a couple loose ends.
Right. Is the next meeting will be when the next Board of Ed meeting is in July, if we're having one? Is
Yes.
that, okay.
Yes, the next meeting is scheduled for 5:45 before our next Board of Ed meeting.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank-
Personnel hasn't met since our last board meeting, although we're working with Tricia to get a date scheduled to wrap up negotiations with our nurses bargaining unit. And that date is not set yet, correct? So we're still working on that. Buildings and grounds?
No meeting scheduled, but I assume that after last night's meeting, which I was not able to attend, there probably is some things that we should discuss in building and grounds as well as bringing it forward to the whole committee, the whole Board of Ed.
Okay. Craig, Meg?
CREC is not meeting this month. We're done now until September, and there will be some CREC activities which people are always welcome to go to when they do their book bag event in the fall or in August. They have a big block party at the CREC facility on Charter Oak Avenue, I believe, and 1,200 book bags go out to kids in the community. So it's really an amazing time. They also have, I think they have a fall staff, which is everybody can be invited to that too as well, the board. But for the summer, we're pretty quiet right now, which is a nice break for everybody.
All right. Dave, Board of Selectmen?
Just a couple small things. They talked about they're gonna do some balance transfers, planning and zoning. And they're also going to propose purchasing of equipment. Town truck, police car, air tanks for the fire department. Reason why that's important is because tomorrow night, there's a special meeting. Town meeting, and then there's a public hearing on each one of these, because they have to go through that process for these to be approved. And there is not a Board of Selectmen meeting tomorrow night, just these special meetings.
Okay. Do you remember what time those are at? I can look it
Like
up.
6:30, I think was one of them starts, and then they go about 10 minutes each.
Okay. Thank you. And do we think that's a Buck Foreman?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks for that reminder.
Yep.
Did you have anything else?
Nope, that was it. That was major.
Okay, thanks. Youth Services Advisory.
Summer kickoff is tomorrow. It's going to be on the green, and it, I believe, starts in the later afternoon. They have a petting zoo and all kinds of activities, face painting, much the same as last year and bigger and better. So that is tomorrow afternoon. Summer kickoff. The library's involved in that, and that's near the senior center, library, and the community building, the police department on that gazebo area. So hopefully it's nice and doesn't rain, and everybody will show up. It'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for that reminder.
Yeah.
Safe Schools and Inclusion Coalition. I think, Sarah, you said.
Vacation until September.
Great. And Strategic Capital Improvements Committee. So, Charles alluded to, we had an epically long meeting last night. It was a solid 4 hours. Yeah. And, I'm pleased to say that coming out of the meeting, there was a lot of progress made. There were recommendations voted on. The committee made the recommendation to decommission Brownstone as a school by a 7-2 vote. The committee we'll voted to recommend that the 6th grade be moved up to the middle school. That was a unanimous vote. And the committee recommended by a 7-2 vote that Valley View be renovated to new to serve as a pre-K through 2nd grade elementary school, and that Gildersleeve be heavily renovated, an alterations project to serve as a 3rd through 5th grade school. And there was a lot of debate around that last piece in particular. It's likely going to be slightly more expensive to do an alterations only project at Gildersleeve rather than a renovate to new. But that kind of hangs on the square footage allotment from the state. So in order to do a renovate to new and take advantage of reimbursement, our 56% anticipated reimbursement from the state, we would need to demolish. Fryer had talked about the need to demolish somewhere between 7,000 and 9,000 square feet at Gildersleeve. And so there was a lot of conversation at the committee last night about the fact that, you know, one of the concerns, one of the hangups for people in the first go around was conversation around universal pre-K and around what happens if in 10 years we see a population increase. And so if we spend, you know, a little more and do renovations only, we think it's possible to maintain the full square footage there, which would allow us some flexibility in the future. If we, you know, saw an increase in population for whatever reason that meant we needed more classroom space. There's more flexibility at that school if we maintain the square footage. And it would certainly be more affordable in the future to reconfigure classrooms inside Gildersleeve to make space for students than it would be to do like a bump out at Valley View. So a lot of the conversation centered around that. That was ultimately where the committee landed. It was a 7-2 vote with that sort of landed on that recommendation. In general, there was a lot of conversation around biz and, you know, John Dillon made some really good points that a lot of folks on the committee, agreed with, around the potential use of biz by the community for other purposes, whether that's Parks and Rec or or youth services, keeping access to that gym, space for the food pantry, potential for leasing out a portion of the building for other purposes that could offset some of the costs of operating and upgrading that building. So there was a lot of conversation about biz. I left out an important chunk of the motion. The recommendation that passed also included recommendation to allocate $8 million towards renovations at the high school, along with, you know, a commitment from the community and from the Board of Selectmen to allocate savings from consolidation and bonds dropping off. So over the next several years before a new bond kicks in, to allocate those funds towards renovations at the updates at the school to kind of start chipping away at some of those necessary capital improvements. So that was part of the recommendation, and the final piece of the recommendation was to include 2 million in the bonding package to go towards brownstone and making some important initial upgrades, HVAC, roof, whatever is determined most necessary, so that the town can continue operating in that space. I think that was the gist of where we landed. There were a lot of numbers being thrown around. With that recommendation, the anticipated cost to Portland was about $50.8 million, which is just, you know, a pretty astronomical number. But one of the things that Dr. Britton brought up that I think is really important is that, and that I think will be in the report that he and Carl are going to work to draft, is a recommendation to our first selectman and to the Board of Selectmen to do sort of a financial assessment of where we're at as a community, with our bonding on the park, anticipated revenue from Brainerd Place and from what's happening on the riverfront, to just get a more complete picture of what our needs are and what is changing for the town financially right now, so that we can understand what the impact of this would be to taxpayers. So, was there anything you wanted to add since you sat through that whole meeting too?
You got it all. I mean, the recommendations were good. It addresses what you do with all of the buildings, right?
Yep.
It to me, the benefits were it addresses gym space. It addressed park and rec needs. It addressed any concerns about traffic at Valley View. It addressed a lot of what we heard as concerns around the Valley View pre-K-5. It's definitely a sticker shock. It's a big number, but I agree with Laurel that, you know, if you look at that big number and then consider it in the context of whether it's a 20-year or a 30-year bond, that amortization table, and then how those costs could be offset by overhead savings from the reduction, by the retirement of bonding on the secondary school and the park, which are the last two pieces the town has. And the town needs to take a longer term look at what the net grand list will be, how that revenue will be generated off that net grand list from what the decision was about the tax rate on the cars, the abatement coming off on Brainerd Place, and new growth in the town. So all those things need to be looked at holistically so that when the numbers presented to the community, it won't all be new costs. It will be offset by significant savings, but also hopefully future growth. Now, it's not going to be zero. I mean, there's not going to be a net zero, but I think that when all of that's done, if it's done well and right, I think that will take some of the sting of that number out. That said, by the end of this, I would look at the town and say you'd have a beautiful Valley View, a really well done Gildersleeve, an appropriate use for Brownstone, and have done the work on this school that needs to be done. So I commend the committee for checking all of those boxes. I think that it was a 4-hour marathon last night, but I think it got to the right place. It got to the place it needs to be, which is asking me and Carl now to go write a report. So I'm going to be very busy. I'll try to get this done before our board retreat. I don't think it's going to happen in June, but likely the committee's going to need to meet again, review this report, take action on the report, and then from there, that report I think will be presented to a joint Board of Ed, Board of Selectmen meeting either this summer or early in the fall. But I will promise you this, that report, I'll try to keep it succinct. It won't be succinct. It'll be long. There's a lot of ground to cover. We've done a lot of long meetings and a lot of legwork over the past several months, but I'm gonna, do some due diligence and bring you a document that I think answers a lot of the questions folks have.
Yeah, and the only thing that didn't get highlighted and that was important, that I thought was important in our conversation last night, and that I certainly tried to go back to, and I thought Jen Martinez spoke to it really well, is that, trying to keep in mind that these are big numbers, these are big decisions for our community, and keeping in mind what's best for our kids and what's best for teaching and learning has to be, that has to be an important part of the equation as well. And Jen did really speak to that, and I thought represented the teacher voice well, when she said pretty firmly, when we all know Brownstone's a beautiful building, and it's an important central part to our community, but it is at this point not a developmentally appropriate building to house 3rd through 5th grade. And she said pretty firmly that was not, that was not something that she could support. And so I think that was an important piece of the conversation and something that we should keep in our minds as well as we move forward. And several Brownstone teachers had spoken to that very eloquently at previous meetings.
Yeah, if I could add, and it was to hear that, and then I think Mr. Dillon did a nice job of saying that there's also, all right, so if you decommissioned Gildersleeve or Valley View, the problem is that those buildings don't have a lot of residual value outside of being schools, right? I mean, you couldn't really turn Valley View over to Parks and Rec because it doesn't have a gym, right? I mean, those schools would be on a path to likely being torn down because they're not going to become anything other than an old school, right? Whereas, and I think Mr. Dillon did a nice job of sharing that, Brownstone has a lot of potential for town or commercial use through leasing or doing so. Yes, I share the concern that turning a 1930s era high school into a 2030 era elementary school would be astronomically expensive, and still in a place that is on Main Street with the riverfront being developed the way it is, right? And that of the 3 elementary schools, that building longer term in the future has a lot of other places that it could become as a town entity and a commercial space that Gildersleeve and Valley View lack. And I think that was also what was reflected in the Land Use Committee report. So, I know Brownstone has been the elephant in the room of a lot of this, that a lot of people are having a hard time getting to the point of seeing that building anything other than a school. But I think last night there was there were some really good points made about it in terms of its appropriateness for the developmental age of elementary school students and its long-term viability as something other than school.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. So I don't know if folks have questions.
I'm gonna just ask the
Yeah.
one that I probably shouldn't ask, but, well, there were two that dissented, and I'll guarantee I know one of them is that person, if he's not happy, going to be against what we're proposing.
I don't know. You'd have to ask him.
I guess I would say, look, if you watch the tape, the one other breakthrough moment I think we had over this process is that at minimum, I think everybody now understands that there is no cheap
Yeah.
or easy way out of this pickle, right? The only options are going to have pros and cons, and the only options are going to have a big price tag. There's no cheap and easy. If there were a cheap and easy way, I promise you we would have found it.
Yeah.
Everybody on that committee last night made recommendations or took action on, at minimum, $43 million on the town of Portland, right? Nobody was here saying, I think we can get away with it for a couple $1 million.
Right.
Everybody was recognizing, based on the work that Slam and Sightlines and Bob and Fryer have done for us and the tours we took, that everybody's recognized that the deteriorated conditions of the facilities are not a couple $1 million fixes. They're tens of millions of dollar fixes.
Yeah.
So everybody on that committee, I believe, was behind 35, 40, that we were only apart by some cases $3 to $5 million, which on a $100 million project is not a lot. It really boiled down to the brownstone, down to are we comfortable with, is the community comfortable with that becoming something other than a school? That's really, I think, where the loggerheads came. But in terms of the price tag, Laurel, you're there.
Yeah, I mean, so there were two other motions made that both failed for different configurations that maintained biz. The first motion that was made wasn't putting enough money towards it. I would argue that the second motion that was made was also not allocating enough adequate money towards a renovation at biz. And I think that's a big part of why both of them failed. But even that second one that allocated 17 million to biz would have been a total cost to Portland of $43 million. So literally, I mean, Charles said it, everyone at the table acknowledged that you need at least that much money, right? And it's, as you said it, there is no cheap and easy solution. It is an expensive solution. It is a complicated solution. And the question is, how do we balance the investment that our taxpayers make with what's best for the community, what's best for teaching and learning, what's best for our kids? How do we balance it with safety? How do we balance it with having space to potentially grow in the future should that happen? It's all the things we've been talking about for 5 years now. And we were over many, many different possible configurations last night. And I think that the one we landed on it's a decent recommendation. And I anticipate there'll be more good conversation between the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen at our joint meeting. But it was so important to just take a step forward, and be able to kind of
Make that recommendation.
make the recommendation and keep this moving.
Well,
I'd like to just add one thing, and I think the wisdom of this committee, in spite of what you all had to endure through the many months of meetings, the wisdom of the committee prevailed. And what I see, just the summary that you gave, Laurel and Charles, is that we've addressed the issue of middle school, high school, fixing the problems that exist there. We're fixing brownstone, so it's a more feasible use of the building. We've addressed the park and rec issue about basketball courts and space. We're going to have enough space, and I like the idea of having that additional space because we will have universal pre-K, or we will have reimbursement, or we'll be able to be eligible for a 15% construction grant for special ed spaces if we decide to increase the number of students in any of our programs. And that's certainly a consideration if we're looking to reduce the number of outplacements. So, so that conversation would include that extra space, the 7 or 9,000 square feet at Gildersleeve. And it solves the problem of brownstone. It's not a suitable, it was a good high school. It's a great, building for commercial or for offices for the town. It's certainly a beautiful building on Main Street that people look to and admire. I think we answered all the questions, and I think that the wisdom of the committee, and I think, you and Bob, Charles, Laurel, Carl, and all the other members, the wisdom prevailed. And while it was painful and I watched the recordings, I'm really proud I can support this. And I guess the question I have is, the joint meeting, and then what's the time frame for getting this to a referendum?
Yeah, that's a great question. We talked about that just a little bit. The recommendation from Fryer, from Mike Serrano, is that we plan to go to referendum in May next year with the budget. He's suggesting that, we would want to leave ourselves a lot of time to do education, this very important work, educating the community about not only about the need, but about why the solution works, what it looks like. Give the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education a good amount of time, and this committee, members of this committee who moved this forward, time to help the community understand what the problem is and what the proposed solution is, and to do all the additional work that will have to be done by the town finance folks and bond council and all of that to make sure that, we can get to a place of referendum. We would be really pushing it to try and get to November, and it wouldn't leave us a lot of time to do some of that work. So he's suggesting May.
Great.
Obviously, the only thing that makes me feel a little nervous there is that knowing that the grant deadline is the end of June, if we wait till May, and if it were to fail, that we would just be delaying this further. So time is, very much on my mind, but I do see the wisdom in waiting until May to give ourselves plenty of time to get as much information out as possible.
I agree. I think that's a good time frame, because that will need to be brought to the kind of the citizens, also teachers, students, parents, whatever the stakeholders. So great. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you, and thank you to the committee. It's a lot of work.
It's been a lot of work, and I know it was a much more substantial commitment than a lot of members had anticipated. We thought we would be wrapped up in March. So this was, this was a lot for, and truly have a lot of gratitude for the folks who agreed to serve on that and have stuck it out. It's just a lot of folks really committed to doing right by our community and by our kids. And I try and keep that in mind. Yeah. All right. Shall we keep it moving? Is there any audience of citizens? We have anyone online? Just Meg and John. All right. Then we'll go to Board of Ed member comments. Let me start with you, Meg. Anything from you?
Just congratulations to the graduation class of 2025.
Yeah.
They were spectacular the other night. The weather played into it, and it was just a very meaningful, wonderful ceremony. And to all of our students, have a great summer. Go down to the library, read books, get outside in the fresh air, and get ready for another great September start. That's all.
Thanks, Meg.
Yep.
Sarah?
Everything Meg said.
Perfect.
Yeah, I agree with that too. And I got a little personal update here. When I looked at the retreats coming up, I was able to look at each one of them and say, I can make all of these because I retired as of last Friday.
Bravo.
Stanley came up with a voluntary early retirement incentive plan, which I took advantage of. Very generous. So I wasn't planning to, but it was time. So
Oh, great.
Congratulations, Dave.
Congratulations,
That's a
Dave.
milestone.
yes, it's a lot less pressure. I can't believe it.
Yeah.
You know,
Good for you.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, now in your
And
retirement. you
And
can
driver.
Or
at least a backup,
a lot
Dave,
more
at least a
business down
backup,
to Alabama,
right?
right?
Yeah.
Not really, because, busy, first year is when you do most of your trips.
Yeah.
Then they kind of fade off a little bit after that.
They-
We're still going down this fall for a game and parents weekend.
Roll Tide.
Good.
Nice.
Nice. Well, that's
Congratulations.
great.
Thank you.
Congrats.
Congratulations.
Stacy.
Yeah, I'm the opposite. I'm looking at all the going, which
Oh,
day in my
no.
work schedule can I possibly make this work? So I will do that. But I echo what Meg said. That was a great graduation. It was such a great night, and
Yep,
yeah, I'm
yes.
just happy to be a part of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely great to be a part of that each year, especially this year.
Especially
Yeah,
this year.
especially this year. Yeah.
And one thing, I know we keep popping up about universal preschool, so I was pulled up on my computer about the early childhood education endowment. And just want to be clear that at least at this time, maybe
Mhm.
universal pre-K will be talked about as a publicly funded
Continues to
preschool
be
model.
floated every now and again.
Yes, but right now, that model is not pushed on to public
Mhm.
schools. It is increasing slots that people can apply for
Right.
within their community in the private sector. Certainly, public schools are not excluded, but at this point, it's
Yeah.
not,
I'm glad you mentioned that. I was reading about that too. There were two things, right? It's increasing slots that become income sensitive to
Yes.
help support families. And then I also like that it was recognizing pre-K teachers as teachers and increasing
Yes.
so that more people are willing to open slots if you have more
Yes.
people to staff them.
There are.
I agree with you. It would be interesting. I like the route because to push it onto public schools with the lack of facilities
Right.
public schools would have, it
Right.
would need that endowment would quickly be eaten up with the square footage needed to add on to a lot of elementary schools
Mm-hmm.
capacity for it. So I think there was some wisdom in this endowment. I kind of like the approach. I'm glad you said that.
and in addition is providing them healthcare. That's another.
Right.
Of that.
Yeah.
Access CT health, so that'll be great for those early education teachers.
Yeah, it's great. And thank you for that clarity. I think that the reason it keeps coming up in conversation around this is because, I mean, for the last decade, the state keeps floating the idea of universal pre-K and you're right, it didn't happen this year. And I don't anticipate it's going to happen because the challenges with creating space for those programs, providing funding for those programs, I mean, that would impact every district in the state. And would be incredibly expensive. And maybe that's where we're heading eventually. It's not happening right now. So that's a good point.
No, and I also think by elevating the salaries and elevating the status of early childhood teachers, that's ensuring that the home daycare as well as the franchises and the things through churches and whatnot have a higher standard for their children in the programs, because that's a concern, is that not every program is and not every home daycare is great. And we know that there is, now that standard, and I think that will elevate the status of whether we get universal pre-K or not, the status of early childhood education in the state through private, public and commercial venues.
Kim, did you have anything else? I'm gonna cut you off. Okay. Great. And I just wanted to say thank you to Kate Lawson, who always puts together such a beautiful graduation celebration for our students, and congratulations to our graduates, and just wishing everybody a wonderful, wonderful summer. I hope everyone stays safe and healthy. All right, so I'm gonna ask for a motion to enter executive session for the purpose of discussion about a stipulated agreement, as well as the Board of Education self-evaluation, and to invite Dr. Britton to join us.
Make that motion.
Thank you, Kim. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Seconded by Dave. Thank you both. Is there any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. All right, motion passes unanimously.
Just want to say here.
So my,
Because you need Meg, right? Yeah, do you guys mind clearing out? We're not, Dylan, we're not gonna be long. Do you just want to stay down until?
Okay.
Is that one of the dates?
Just went through that, went through that,
I hadn't. I don't, and I'm like,